I've noticed there's a certain kind of writer's block that pops up with people who write science fiction and fantasy stories. And it's not actually writer's block. It's a symptom of something else. And I dare to say that it is a good symptom. It's a symptom of how carefully you're thinking about the ideas in your story. The trick is not to get paralyzed by it. What happens sometimes when you're writing a science fiction and fantasy story, when you write a scene, you'll come face to face in that scene with what I call a hey, wait a minute moment. And that's when an implication of what you're doing bubbles up, when something comes up about one of the big normative ideas that drives your story. And I've talked before on this channel about what a normative idea is in science fiction and fantasy. It's that big what if that undergirds everything that's happening in your story. You know, what if God is a computer? What if we could teleport ourselves by thinking? And so on. So you have one of these, hey, wait a minute moments when you're writing something, and it makes you stop and wonder about how you are using your big idea. Maybe something you wrote in the scene makes you realize that you've overlooked some implication of how things work in your world. And it's also making you realize you've missed some opportunities, or you haven't thought completely about how this is supposed to play out in real life. And the important thing is that it only happens when you're there in the middle of writing the scene, not when you're planning it at 30,000 feet. And so you stop and you go, oh, wait a minute. Now, there are a couple of key things to keep in mind about this feeling. The first is that it is a symptom. It's a symptom of how you might not have given your story as much thought as you need to have made it hang together. But the second thing to keep in mind is that this symptom is also a symptom of how much care you're putting into the story to begin with. If you're noticing issues like this, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. It means you're trying to see if your story's basic premises hold up under at least some scrutiny. It means you're developing an instinct for what makes sense in your world and what doesn't. Now, the way that you handle these things does not have to be absolutely airtight and bulletproof, because nothing is, and I'm going to get into that a little more later. But when this symptom arises, it does mean you owe it to yourself to hit pause and think about how things are put together. You need to think a little bit about how your story is constructed. Now, notice I didn't say how your world is put together, but rather how your story is put together. If there is some potential hole in the way that your big idea is treated in the story, that is not an idea issue. That is a story issue. That is an issue with how you are treating the idea. That is an issue with what kind of story you're surrounding this idea with. It's an issue with how that story is taking your idea and making the most out of it. Here is a random example that's come out of some stuff I've worked on recently. For a long time now, I've had a story in progress that was a repurposing of a fairly classic science fiction staple mechanic, the idea of the matter transmitter. And I did a video some time back about my original inspiration for this idea, which was Harry Harrison's short story cycle, One Step from Earth. And my own incarnation of the idea was mechanically different. Theoretically, it would work at any distance, even at cosmic scale. It's like a point-and-click interface to the universe, as I wrote down in my notes. But then I said to myself, wait a minute, if it works at cosmic scale, it can work at local scale too. And that means that the local implications of this idea are going to have far more immediate impact. The fact that I can teleport to Andromeda is not going to be as important as the fact that I can also teleport into your living room. So a story about cosmic travel is a substantially different kind of story than a story about people barging into your house. So I had to ask myself, what kind of story do I really want to tell? I have to make some choices here. So the first choice that I could make would have been the simplest, which is to change the mechanic, to switch things up so that this mechanism only works at cosmic scale, not at the local scale. And why not? It's my story. It's my rules. I can make that case if I want. That's the simple way out of the problem. It does come at the cost of being a little bit arbitrary, but arbitrary decisions are not the worst things in a story. They just need to be consistent. So choice number 2 is I can accept the near-range implications. I can accept the fact that, yeah, you could use this to barge into people's houses, but I could tell a story that's not focused on those things. In other words, in the world of the story, the fact that people can teleport themselves into your living room is, for the sake of the goings-on in the story, not the biggest issue. Maybe there are protections against it. Maybe it happens, but it's rare enough that it's not what the story focuses on. Now, that is a little hard for me to swallow personally, but it is a legitimate option. So you could consider this a lesser version of the first choice, where you have a different kind of arbitrary constraint, but one that's more about what the story is dealing with the idea. It's more about what the people in universe are doing. So choice number 3, we accept the near-range implications, and we make those part of the story too. In other words, we're constructing a new story. So while we do have people going cosmic distances, we also have them barging into each other's houses. And each of those things amount to very different things in the course of the story. And in some ways, this is the hardest choice to make because it means, in some sense, throwing out the original story you were going to write and creating a new one. It means thinking actively about how all of these implications can play out together. But it means now I have that much more to play with, that I have that much more to make a story out of. I might have a much richer story, a much more inclusive story because of this. So when you have one of these, hey, wait a minute moments, you have basically these 3 choices. You can dial things back as a way to keep things more to the original abstract vision for the story. You can try to balance things between your idea and the story, between what you already have and what you're missing at the cost of telling a slightly different story. Or you can embrace completely what you've missed and enjoy having what amounts to a totally new story, although one that may require a lot more homework to pull off than what you originally had in mind, and a lot more responsibility on your part for what to keep track of. My own feelings about this are that ideas are cheap. Ideas are everywhere. Everybody's got an idea. Very few people have stories. Stories are rare. Stories are what matter. So when it comes to having to choose between an idea or a story, side with the story when you can. Choose to make your story a good environment for things to happen to interesting people we care about, rather than just have it be a repository for a clever idea. So again, my feeling is that when you hit on one of these, hey, wait a minute moments, that's a sign. That's a sign that your story is talking to you, that it is trying to tell you, hey, I might be bigger than you think. And when that happens, you should listen to that. You should stop. You should drop everything and listen to that as deeply as you can, because you may be on the verge of having a much bigger and even better story, or maybe even a smaller and better story than you originally had in mind. Now, the last thing I want to say about this, and I may circle back and talk about this in greater detail in another video, but I do want to touch on it here. When you think about these things, when you rethink about these things, you do not need to use them as a way to make your story able to withstand every possible criticism that could be thrown at it. Because no story is 100% immune to criticisms about its logic. Everybody can nitpick something to death. The point is to look for the biggest things that run the risk of directly undermining your premise. And one of the nice bonus for this kind of work is that the more you do it, the better you get at it. The more you're going to be able to drill down and find the proper level of detail to worry about. And also when to say, okay, we've gone deep enough, it's just a story. So from that, I hope you can not only learn to make your stories better, but make more of them and have less of your effort taken up by second-guessing yourself. And that's it. See what you think.